Two companies are working on the same house today, and only one of them has its name on the invoice. Ask a working California fumigator to price a single-story home of roughly 29,000 cubic feet. The answer comes back somewhere from $1,750 to $4,000. Those are real quotes given by pest management professionals at several California companies for a study the state commissioned and published in December of 2025. The same study asked what that identical job costs wholesale when one company hires another to carry it out. For the homeowner's price, the professionals gave a range. For the wholesale price, they gave one figure, $1,250. So one house swings by more than $2,000 depending who you ask. The wholesale rate came back as a single number. Both are licensed, and both are doing exactly what their contracts say. They are two different businesses standing on one lawn, and if you had the money to buy either, the arithmetic pushes hard toward the company that owns almost nothing. What is worth knowing is the exact price at which that stops being a preference and becomes a rule. This is education and entertainment, not financial or investment advice, and the cost stack later on is a model rather than anybody's accounts. Drywood termites and certain wood-boring beetles spend their whole lives inside the wooden members of a building. No soil contact, no mud tubes, nothing to intercept at the foundation. Subterranean termites can be handled from the ground with a soil-applied termiticide or a ring of bait stations. A colony sitting in an attic truss cannot. That gap is what whole structure fumigation fills. Sulfuryl fluoride was registered in 1959, and it is still the only fumigant approved in the United States for controlling pests in dwellings, garages, barns, storage buildings, and commercial warehouses. In California, only two sulfuryl fluoride products are approved for dwellings, Vicane from Douglas Products and Zythor from Ensistex. The gas is odorless, colorless, and non-flammable, which is why every safety rule around it is procedural rather than sensory. In insects, it works metabolically, starving them of usable energy over several days. In mammals, it goes after the central nervous system. Sulfuryl fluoride also leaves no residual activity, so nothing stays behind in the wood. The state's own review says plainly that a fumigated structure can be reinfested, which is why an annual warranty exists in this trade, and why a tent is an event rather than a condition. Almost nothing about demand here is driven by insects. Roughly 70 to 75% of all California fumigations come out of inspections conducted during the purchase of a property. The state report attributes that to the lead enforcement investigator at California's Structural Pest Control Board, then corroborates it by matching housing sales data against the count of structures fumigated. Where an inspection turns up an active drywood infestation, the sale does not close until the treatment is done and a clearance document issues, and the escrow clock does not care what clearing it costs. Volume therefore follows transactions. California's pesticide regulator counted just over 78,000 structures fumigated with sulfuryl fluoride in 2023, and an average of 91,976 a year across 2019 to 2023. One caveat, because it matters later. That report prints the 2023 count twice and does not quite agree with itself. Just over 78,300 in the chapter with the money in it, and 78,834 in the chapter with the trend line, both credited to the same regulator. I am using the lower one because it sits alongside the dollars. Take the higher one and every figure moves by less than 1%. Inside California, 72.3% of that year's fumigations happened in 7 southern counties, and this pool is not growing. California fumigations peaked in 2015 at 110,200 structures and had fallen to roughly 78,000 by 2023, down more than a quarter in 8 years. Home sales collapsed in the 2007 to 2009 recession. Fumigations followed, and the effect took years to surface, because a drywood colony needs 4 or 5 years to mature enough to swarm and be noticed. Buy into this trade and you are buying a share of a fixed pool of events, set by how many houses change hands in a few warm counties. Every question after that is which half of the pool you collect. The split is a licensing fact, and in California it is written down in 3 sentences. Branch 1 is the practice relating to the control of household and wood-destroying pests by fumigation with poisonous or lethal gases. Branch 2 is household pests, explicitly excluding fumigation with those gases. Branch 3 is wood-destroying organisms by insecticides or structural repairs, and it excludes fumigation in the same words. So a firm can inspect the house, find the termites, write the report, and sell the job on a Branch 3 license, and still be legally unable to open the cylinder. The board's entry requirements show what that gap costs. Selling general pest work as a Branch 2 field representative takes 40 hours of training. The termite branch takes 100 hours. Branch 1 takes 6 months, under the immediate supervision of somebody already licensed to fumigate. Above that sits the license a company is actually built on. A Branch 1 operator needs 2 years in gas fumigation, 1 full year of it as a licensed field representative, and an exam passed at 70% or better. And there is no applicator grade in Branch 1 at all. The board counted 3,174 registered pest control companies in its 2021 to 2022 fiscal year, along with 4,065 operators and 14,109 field representatives, and it breaks none of them out by branch. How much of that tent work is subcontracted is not something the board counts. The trade estimates that circulate disagree by wide margins, and none of them trace back to a regulator. What is documented is the architecture that makes subcontracting the obvious move. The trade's own national association, reporting an annual study by a private research firm, puts United States structural pest control revenue at $13.416 billion in 2025, 6% above the $12.654 billion of a year earlier, across 16,565 firms. That is an industry measurement rather than a government statistic. By the same count, 85.4% of residential service revenue is recurring. A tent job is not part of it. The product label is the operating manual, and under federal pesticide law it is enforceable exactly as written. Deviating from it is a federal offense. Sulfuryl fluoride is a restricted use pesticide, for sale to and use only by certified applicators or people under their direct supervision. Read the manufacturer's fumigation manual, and the staffing model writes itself. 2 people trained in the product, at least 1 an applicator licensed by the state, must be present when the fumigant goes in, at any re-entry before aeration, and at the start of aeration. 2 are unnecessary only where monitoring happens remotely, and nobody enters the structure at all. Because the gas cannot be smelled or seen, the label requires a second chemical whose only purpose is to be noticed, chloropicrin, at an ounce per 10,000 to 15,000 cubic feet, released 5 to 10 minutes ahead of the gas. The label rate has not moved since 1959, but the amount actually going into houses has. California averaged 38.49 pounds per structure from 1994 to 2006, and 25.78 pounds from 2007 through 2023, for reasons the state's reviewers admit can only be speculated upon. Then the building is locked or barricaded at every exterior door, against everyone but the certified applicator in charge. The exposure period runs 20 to 24 hours. Aeration is scaled to the dose under California's published aeration plan, a 12-hour minimum where 16 ounces or less per 1,000 cubic feet went in, stepping up to 24 hours above 112 ounces per 1,000 cubic feet. Reoccupancy is gated at 1 part per million or less, measured with what the label calls a clearance device. That instrument is where the chain of duties comes to a point. The Environmental Protection Agency works to a false negative tolerance threshold of 30%. A clearance device at or above that rate is deemed unreliable. In the state report's restatement, that means roughly 1 measurement in 3 could read safe while the gas is still over 1 part per million, though false negatives fall away as concentrations rise. Federal testing in 2021 found certain devices unreliable. On June 30, 2023, the EPA announced early mitigation for residential fumigation, posted no-entry warning signs, site-specific fumigation logs, registrant-funded stewardship training, longer aeration, and the removal of references to approved clearance devices from product labels, with users directed instead to the agency's own website. Revised labels were due that August, and a further round of mandated changes landed in July of 2024. So the label a fumigator reads today names no instrument. Earlier versions did, by brand, and set a calibration interval. The current manual requires a clearance device and points at a federal web page for a list of effective ones. The EPA does not regulate which device a company picks. The state report says so, and puts the duty on county agricultural commissioners. Every duty in that sequence attaches to whoever holds the license. Not one of them attaches to whoever holds the customer. The visible half of this business is fabric. A gas-tight tarp measuring 35 by 60 feet cost around $1,200 at 2021 prices, and covering an ordinary 2,100 square foot home takes 7 or 8 of them, because a tent has to clear a roof, run down every elevation, and overlap at every seam. Call it $8,400 to $9,600 of cloth to wrap that house, nearly 7 to nearly 8 times the wholesale rate the study quotes on its larger test home. Kept off sharp edges, the state report says tarps last for years. Dragged across clay tile, they do not. Then there is the public record of what happens when it fails. California's Pesticide Illness Surveillance Program recorded 275 cases of injury or illness connected to structural fumigation with sulfuryl fluoride across the 30 years from 1992 to 2022, including 20 deaths. Residents entering homes or yards accounted for 124 of those, about 45%. Another 53 were non-residents, neighbors, transients, utility workers. Employees returning to workplaces made up 35, bystanders exposed to drift 34, fumigation workers 14, emergency responders 13, and 2 are unspecified. That is the whole 275, and the program grades its evidence: 24 cases definite, 88 probable, 163 possible. Inside that resident figure is the number that matters. Of those 124 residents, 21 were exposed while the fumigation was still live, people going back into a tented house. 91 were exposed after the structure had been cleared for re-entry, and a further 12 after that. Most of the residential harm on that 30-year record happened after somebody signed to say the house was safe. Against a recent California volume of about 92,000 structures a year, and the earlier years ran higher, that is a low rate across 3 decades. It is not a rate of 0, and its tail is fatal. That is the exposure a company with a balance sheet has to price, and a company with only a phone number does not. The split shows clearest in a federal criminal docket. Homeowners in Palm City, Florida, arranged a fumigation with Termite under a warranty they already held. The company that tented the house was a wholesale fumigator, Sunland Pest Control Services. In the EPA's own words, Termite, without warning or approval, subcontracted the job to Sunland. Sunland and 2 of its employees pleaded guilty in 2016 to applying sulfuryl fluoride contrary to the label's safety requirements. The failures map onto the label duties one for one: no fact sheet provided, trained personnel not kept on site afterwards, the structure not properly aerated, and no clearance testing with an approved, calibrated detector. A clearance tag was posted anyway, saying the home was safe. The employees got 12 months each, the company 5 years of probation. The brand the homeowners contracted with, and which held their warranty, was not charged. The company that owned the trucks, bought the gas, and carried the label obligations was. That is not a claim about anybody's character, but a description of where the duties sit, in the same place as the license, the insurance, and the capital. The gas itself changed hands twice in 8 years without the product changing at all. Dow sold the Vicane and Profume brands to Douglas Products in 2015, backed by the private equity firm Altamont Capital Partners, and in 2023, Brightstar Capital Partners acquired Douglas Products outright. What each new owner inherited was a registration, and the label rate underneath it is the one set in 1959. Watch what the consolidators pay for. It is the cleanest read on which half of this trade is worth owning. Rent-A-Kill Initial announced its acquisition of Termite in December of 2021 and completed it in October of 2022. The deal valued Termite's equity at $6.7 billion, which is the price of the shares rather than the price of the whole company, including its debt. The combined company reported approximately 4.9 million customers and 57,700 employees. Rollins, which owns Orkin, files it in plainer numbers. Revenue of $3.761 billion in 2025 against $3.389 billion a year earlier. 94 acquisitions across the last 3 years, more than 2 million customers, and a revenue mix the company states directly in its annual filing, about 75% recurring, 10% ancillary, 15% one-time. Termite and ancillary revenue grew about 14% in 2025, and about 10 of those 14 points arrived without buying anybody. What that money buys is customer relationships and the renewal book a tent job leaves behind. The tent itself sits in the 15% that happens once. The house is the study's test case again. Single story, 29,000 cubic feet, priced in 2025. If you are writing the check for a business here, this is the comparison that matters. One owner holds the customer. It inspects, it writes the report, it quotes the homeowner, and it hires the tent out at the wholesale rate. It owns no tarps, no rig, no cylinder cage, no branch 1 license, and none of the label duties that put a company on a federal docket. It keeps the relationship, which, in a treatment that leaves nothing behind in the wood, is the part that renews. The other owner holds the equipment and collects the wholesale rate whatever the homeowner was charged. In 2023, California pest management professionals spent about $31 million on sulfuryl fluoride, applying 2.3 million pounds of it across those 78,324 structures. Divided out. The gas runs about $13.48 a pound, and about $396 a structure. That is roughly 32 cents of every wholesale dollar spent before a single person is paid. On the report's other structure count, the same division gives $393 a structure and 31 cents on the wholesale dollar. That is the whole practical difference between them. Take the gas out of the wholesale rate and $854 is left. Illustratively, and these are modeled figures rather than filings, that budget covers 4 people to tarp the house and return days later to pull it off, an overnight guard on an evacuated building, a licensed technician for the aeration and the clearance read, the warning agent, the fuel, the truck, and the working share of the fabric. The softest assumption there is the labor, and if it is wrong in only one direction. The state's report prices the tent, not the inspection that sold it, so the customer owner's cost side stays unmodeled and no profit is claimed for it. The equipment owner's revenue is fixed by the contract between the two companies. The customer owner's gross profit is whatever the homeowner agreed to, less the wholesale rate it pays out. Set those against each other, and there is exactly one retail price where the firm that owns the customer keeps, as gross profit, the entire sum the firm that owns the equipment is paid to run the whole job. It is the wholesale rate, doubled. $2,500, one source number multiplied by 2. Below it, the equipment owner's whole revenue is larger. Above it, the customer owner's gross profit is larger, and every dollar of that difference arrives clean, with no gas, no crew, no license, and no exposure attached. So where does the market sit against that? 2 readings in the report answer it, and a third only looks like it does. The professionals' quotes from the cold open put 2/3 of their range above the crossover. A cost table in the same report, drawn from an outside study it cites, prices that same house to the consumer as a band that is the crossover, give or take a quarter, so its middle lands on it to the dollar. Then the state total, which sounds like a third reading. California consumers spent between $172 million and $287 million on these fumigations in 2023. Divide that back out across the annual average the report itself uses, about 92,000 structures, and it hands back the cost table's band, floor, and ceiling within a few dollars at each end. That is the second reading at state scale, not a third one. One caveat on the fixed side. The crossover is only as firm as the one number under it, so move it. Illustratively, that same outside study, quoted elsewhere in the report, prices a smaller structure's wholesale work as a range from $1,590 to $2,648 against retail prices for that structure of $2,000 to $5,000. Those retail prices sit above the band the same study gives the bigger house, and the report reconciles the two nowhere. Same ladder. Doubled, that wholesale range puts the crossover from $3,180 to $5,296. At the bottom, 3/5 of that retail band still sits above it. At the top, none of it does, and the fumigator's whole revenue is the larger figure at every price on the board. The mechanism holds either way, only the crossing point moves, because the wholesale figure under it is this house's number and not a national constant. Both positions are rational. The wholesale fumigator is not being taken advantage of. A flat rate that repeats is a route, and a route is the only thing that makes a truck, a branch 1 license, and $8,000 or $9,000 of fabric worth owning. The most reliable source of volume is somebody else's customers. The retail firm is doing real work too. It found the termites, it walks the homeowner through 2 or 3 days out of the house, and its name is on the paperwork when a roof tile breaks. They are being paid for 2 different things. One is paid to carry out a procedure. The other is paid for the finding that made the procedure compulsory. And in California, those findings arrive on their own, somewhere between 55,000 and 59,000 times in 2023. Every time an inspection during a sale turns up a live colony. The portable test works on any service industry that has split this way. Find the rate paid between them and ask whether it moves when the retail price does. If it is fixed, you already know which half collects every dollar of upside, and you can read it off one invoice. Here, the homeowner's price came back as a range, and the rate between the 2 companies came back as one number. Strip the gas out of it, and what remains, $854, has to run an entire fumigation however the homeowner was billed. At twice that rate, the side that owns everything is paid, for the gas, the crew, the license, and the risk, exactly what the side that owns nothing keeps for making the phone call. But that crossing point is not the boundary. Every dollar of the homeowner's price above the wholesale rate belongs to the side that owns nothing. The tag on the door says the structure may be reoccupied. Somebody with a license signed it. Somebody else sent the bill.